Morning, viewer, wherever you are following us, and we appreciate your time with us. We apologize for this delay because there are a number of issues technically which were being handled down here, lakini tunawashukuru kwa kutufuatilia kupitia mitandao ambao mnatufuatilia na tunasema asanti sana. We today again, as usual, even last Friday actually we had a problem, not a problem, but we had a live broadcast that came our way, and we had to give way. Our viewers could have asked what was happening, but I think it was communicated early that that program will not be there because we had the Youth Day celebrations that were on that day. And we had, for those who followed the president who was presiding over the Youth Day celebrations. Today, again, later on, we shall be having another broadcast that will be coming live, but I think it will come after the end of the program. But we thank you for the time you have with us. We thank you for the contributions, for those who send in their views and the information to back up the issues that we discuss here on this program of the Pan-African Friday. Now, the Pan-African Friday is a program that looks at issues of Africa, issues of African interest, developments of Africa, for Africans both back here at home and those in the diaspora. So I have told over and again, I don't understand the word diaspora very well, but I know there are Africans who are living outside of Africa. They may not be in the diaspora, they may be in their own homes. People who are in the Caribbean, people who are in Brazil, where Africans who were forced to live in those countries, let alone those of today, as who ourselves have taken in those places willingly. There are those who are taken unwillingly. In the studio today, I will be joined, actually I'm already joined by the usual panelist, Sister Rachel Takali, and also Bwana, the Pan-African man, and Ndugu Rugarama. Today, the number of issues that we'll be looking at, of course, the number of developments that are taking place on the African continent, coming all the way from the South Africa, where the BRICS summit is taking place as we speak, to the northern part of Africa, where a number of issues are taking place. You go to Libya, where the wars have been on, but now with some relative peace as people prepare for elections, I think, this month.
Where?
Libya.
Zimbabwe, Libya.
Yeah.
Libya, they have been postponing, but they should have carried out that election anyway.
Exactly, a long time ago.
It is Zimbabwe where they are.
Yeah. So we'll be looking at all this, of course, not everything, but a few that we'll be able to look at. Of course, when we look at the violence and the suspicion and the tension that is taking place in the western part of Africa. So normally when we start our week, we start with what has been happening in this week, and we look at it from the different perspectives and the different views that we have. Of course, along the program, I know something will come up about your friend who is supposed to have jumped out of the plane or died in the plane. There is a lot of now talk about that. There's, you know, one time in Uganda here, they said they almost caught Kony, but they only found his underpant. This one, they found a phone. So many things happen in this country. So, Rachel, your week?
For me, across the continent, I've been actually meditating not on just what you've referred to. For me, I just wonder what the people where Wagner has had a big footprint, what they're thinking upon the demise of Prigozhin.
What is Prigozhin then?
Well,
because
if he's not dead,
why I'm saying up to now, I have not believed he's dead until it will be proved. Of course, a lot of Western media are proving, including the Russian state media, that is dead. But I'm also aware that there was a decoy, the second plane.
Well, we'll find out sooner or later. But what I'm wondering what those people are thinking who have been leaning on Wagner, the people in Central African Republic and Mali and Niger, Libya even. I wonder what they're thinking, whether they're thinking this is the end of their plans with the Russians, or has been something I've been considering. But that aside, I'm also wondering what these countries on the African continent who were very keen to join BRICS, but were left out this time. I wonder what they're thinking.
But you have raised a very important issue which we cannot overlook, the issue of Wagner and the group. I know there was there's that feeling that if Prigozhin dies, what happens to the leadership? But I'm sure he was not working alone. He could have had other people he was working with. But that's of course the problem of a pragmatic leader. When sometimes a person dies, there could come up other factions within that group. But also, let's look at why now? Why did he die now? Why not earlier?
I think that is a very difficult question. But I think that aside, Mr. Prigozhin...
Did he not see this coming, you mean?
Mr. Prigozhin, as far as we've been told, I think he was part and parcel, so deeply entangled with the Russian state, and Mr. Putin in particular, that I think there is a tendency to forget who you're actually dealing with when you're close to them. If in fact he was fixed by Mr. Putin, then it is consistent with what Mr. Putin has been accused of in the past. He's an unforgiving figure and quite harsh in his repercussions. So Mr. Prigozhin, in many people's eyes, was attempting to supersede the role of the Russian state, especially on the international front. He was attempting to even blackmail the military leadership because of the role he played in Ukraine. And actually Mr. Putin made mention of that he will never forget the role he played in that conflict. But Mr. Prigozhin had also been an insider of sorts. It has been told us these many months that part of his wealth initially was formed or came out of his close relationship supplying the Kremlin with foodstuffs. And he built on that and actually transformed himself into a mercenary. It is where he has been getting his wealth as of to date, but I think he made the error, the fatal flaw, when he thought that he could actually blackmail Mr. Putin. He wanted to have his way, but I think in Mr. Putin's calculations, the Russian state had to be protected. In other words, a mercenary cannot set the tone. Mr. Prigozhin's exertions in Africa were largely unsuperintended by the Russian state. Russia was putting money into these mercenary activities in Niger and in Mali and so on, but it was not closely overseen. So Mr. Prigozhin, I think, got used to having his way until he carried that same mode of operation into Ukraine. But when he carried it into Ukraine, unfortunately, he was very close to home. The Russian generals wanted to have the last say. They wanted to be able to control activities on the battlefield. But Mr. Prigozhin was adamant that since his troops were leading the assault, and they were disproportionately the ones paying the price in blood, he really had to have a lot more say and a lot more clout. And I'm thinking that in the end, the clashing of a bureaucracy with a man who was at the center of it all, an entrepreneur by nature, I think came to an unsustainable end.
Yeah.
We know that while Mr. Putin got mileage from the activities of Wagner, he was not willing to let the levers go. And I think when it came to disposing of the bureaucracy of the Ministry of Defense in Russia, or going Wagner's way, Wagner had to go. But Mr. Prigozhin, unfortunately, I think he kept a deaf ear to the fact that the dynamics in Ukraine were not the same as those that he had been used to in Africa. So he failed to adjust to the dynamics in Europe. And I think he became more of a liability, and at some point, he just had to go.
Yeah, but also, I know, Nduguru Garama, shall come to you, but when you look at that, you may, of course, if the question is raised today, if this guy is dead, who could have killed him? You could find a lot of avenues through which he could have been killed. First of all, his halting of a march to Moscow, and then trying to cut a deal with Putin could have put him in more danger than if he did went ahead with the march on Moscow, because I think they were also a bit clear, of course, much as Moscow had not come out openly to engage in the war against him. But I think the state of Russia had issues in dealing with that. You remember there were generals in the army who more or less were sympathetic to him, and that's where the purging also immediately after that failed coup started. So the army in Moscow also got scared, some of the officials, because of that failed coup, because some of them had Putin at least made an input in that. But also, when Prigozhin got money from the state of Russia to facilitate his activities, it is also said that he used some of that money with the enemies of Russia. He was even able to secure some equipment that was superior to the Russian equipment. But so it is possible that those he dealt with also may not have wanted to be known that he dealt with them. So there was a possibility that they also wanted to get rid of him. Now, the other thing is that those within his own ranks could have also seen him as becoming a liability over time, because you are running Ukraine war, you are running in Africa, you are running all over the place, and you know he's dictatorial. Now this is the information we get, that he was also a very strong dictator, but of course being Russian, you can understand some of the positions that he used to take even during the war in Ukraine. But also there's also the other aspect that when you look at it, he himself had also, I think, somehow gotten, because if you have dealt with the Russian state, let alone Putin, for having dealt with the Russian state, he should have known what could have happened to him if he went back to Russia. But this is a guy who was flying freely between, moving freely, this time was flying, but I think in the past has been moving between Petersburg and not only the capital, but also other cities that he has been moving and greeting people. Now that one in a state like a strong state of Russia would have put his life in danger. But the most important thing, and as like it was appreciated by the government of Russia, that his role in Ukraine cannot be underestimated rather. But he is also accused of having traded the Russian facilities, including the military, because whenever he would have his men either captured or threatened by the Ukrainian forces, he would, I'm told, sell off the locations of the Russian army. So some of all these things are put together. You may not need the Russian state to kill him. he definitely would be killed one way or the other, because there was a lot that was against him more than for him. So I think his death has come at the time when it was not immediately expected, but it was unexpected. Ndugu Rugaramu.
Thank you so much, Comrade Mututa. Good morning once again to my sister Rachel Takari, and good morning to our viewers. Some maybe it could be good evening or something like that, depending on where you're watching us from.
Sure.
The moderator Ndugu Mututa has already apologized for the last week when we were not available. There is growing now popularity of this program. I keep getting phone calls left and right. So it is in order for us to send in our apologies when we don't appear. And we also reckon the fact that Pan-Africanism is one of the 4 major pillars upon which this government rotates. So the very minimum that the government can do is to afford us this opportunity to communicate with the public upon a pillar on which the government runs. Having said that, the week, I was discussing with my colleague, whom you should be knowing very well, Comrade Kagoro Brian. Comrade Kagoro Brian is an astute lawyer and a great Pan-Africanist who is chief campaigner of the reparations out of the colonialism and slave trade, especially. And he's from Zimbabwe. I hope you also know that as of last night, our own very brother, Comrade Maponga Joshua, touched base at Entebbe International Airport, coming for the awards, which is happening tomorrow on Saturday at Fairway. Describing the elections in Zimbabwe, Comrade Kagoro said that if he has ever seen anything as shambolic, it is on the African continent in form of an election. It is what is happening in Zimbabwe. Is his words, not my words.
Oh, but why would he say that now if Shangarai was still living to tell, would have told him this is what you are seeing is nothing done in the past?
Well, Brian Kagoro lives in Zimbabwe. He's a Zimbabwean. He's an accomplished man who studies global events. I'm just quoting his words, and but that was his opinion. And
the crocodile.
He says the crocodile has invested well over $1 billion in the election. Given the economic state of Zimbabwe,
sure,
that is way too much money. I don't know if probably my senior brother is supporting Chamisa, and maybe that is the reason he's giving that kind of opinion. But he also gave me a link, and I was following the debate.
Ndugu Rugunda is there, will tell us when he comes back.
Yes. I was following the debate and the exchange of the upper middle class, and you can see the academia, the social, political actors, they're exchanging. Anyhow, the truth of the matter is that here we are, ZANU-PF, one of our oldest revolutionary political leaders.
Garama, on that, part of the problems that we are having now in the western part of Africa has to do with the way we conduct our elections.
I told you a long time ago that the kind of democracy we have on the African continent is not ours. Now, and two, we equally have got a fair blame of ourselves as Africans.
For shambolic outcomes.
Because you see, in all fairness, even if by the way this is a borrowed democracy, or maybe forced democracy, if it is democracy at all anyway, but this is what we have. What are we making out of it? We are saying that in an economy like Zimbabwe, and I don't want to go into the merits and demerits of why the Zimbabwean economy is the way it is, because that's a huge debate and another one,
of course,
maybe for another day.
They will tell you the sanctions which have been imposed by the
That
the
is
West.
also true, but we know that Zimbabwe, as we talk now, has got surplus, food surplus. Having closed themselves, they devised means of going into extensive agriculture, and now they have surplus. They're actually supplying food to the rest of the
South
the
African,
neighboring neighboring countries. But like I said, I was just making a comment about my week, and especially the elections in Zimbabwe, and giving reference to Comrade Kagoro, who has been with us here at the Pan-African Secretariat, was the late Tajuddin, you remember him?
Yeah.
And his views really should not be taken lightly, because he's an accomplished man in terms of the Pan-African
And he's a very sober
affairs.
African, yes.
Absolutely. Then, that is now as far as Zimbabwe and the elections. At least that is the major election we have on the African continent.
Now, before even you leave that, after that, Shambolic, we are now using Kagoro's words, not ours.
Yeah, he's the one who said Shamboli.
Now, you have this Shambolic.
They have extended even by the voting.
Exactly, I know.
I think it is going up to tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yes.
Which is today, because the tomorrow, I'm saying
that was yesterday, it was
Yes.
extended to tomorrow today.
And then again in his words, he says, for purposes of cooking results. Not mine.
My
Yes.
worry is, now the president will be elected, and of course the outcomes, we can't now say, we know who is going to be the winner of that election.
Like, I'm not a Jewish prophet, but I can tell you that ZANU-PF and Comrade
Crocodile?
Crocodile, indeed. Like, I think he won himself that title, especially after the Brawayo massacre. You remember
of
the
course,
Brawayo?
after, yeah.
That's where that thing came from.
Exactly.
And in fact, it is argued by those critical analysts of the political events in Zimbabwe that the majority of the work under the ZANU-PF and under the leadership of senior comrade, the late Gabriel Mugabe,
yeah.
was actually not being done by Mugabe himself.
Exactly.
The henchman was actually the crocodile,
Yeah.
as he's famous.
Does he have blood-soaked hands?
So anyway, that alone, then I also witnessed the meeting, the BRICS meeting in Joburg, and the admission. They have so far admitted, I think, Iran.
We have 5 other members.
The Saudi Arabia, Argentina, etc. And I have seen sentiments, some sentiments from some quarters, especially and mainly from the neoliberal academicians and scholars whom we have in plenty here, trying to underrate what the BRICS now is capable of. For heaven's sake, this is just a 15-year-old organization, if my memory serves me right. And we are talking about World Bank and IMF, which commenced in 1944 and began operations in 1946. So we can only give, we give them time and see what will happen going forward. But I want to believe that a combined GDP now of the BRICS as it stands is slightly maybe by about $2 or $1.8 trillion above the combined GDP of USA and the European Union. I find that one something not to joke around, because they may not have gone ahead to give the kind of loans they are supposed to be giving out. Yes, we have got member countries of the BRICS which are also struggling in some respects, but I can assure you that we have had the United States of America especially power declining over time. And I know that there are many things that can be done, including, you remember, Britain was winning wars even when the British Empire was declining. So I know that even when the might of USA is on the decline, as has been clearly captured by the likes of Naomi Chomsky and other international scholars of high repute, still America and the dollar is still relevant, and they are still doing so many things. But we must appreciate the fact that there is now a different way of organizing countries and economies, especially in the global south, because the World Bank and IMF are the thing of the global north. We all know that for a fact. And we cannot underrate the fact that even when we didn't think that there's a power that could emerge and challenge the World Bank, if you like, and the IMF, now we seem to be having one, and it is attracting new members who are also not small members. And we are negatively impacting on the dollar, which is a global reserve. I don't know who gave them that position, but that's how they are, and the global trading currency. So my last observation for this week or so is that I am again noticing the unfortunate trend of impatience when it comes to debate. I don't know why this is becoming a habit, because Mututa, Rachel, we are ardent observers of, because we do the same thing anyway, almost every week. So I take time to watch some of these popular programs on radio, listen to radio, go TV, and these debaters, there is a growing tendency of not giving each other time. You know, somebody is making a submission, and then without even a courtesy of saying, can I render information, Comrade Rachel, Comrade Mututa? Somebody just bumps in and makes whatever he's making, or she makes whatever. So that impatience, is it that we are doing so badly in terms of manners, or what? It's food for thought.
So, sometimes it's not manners, sometimes maybe they don't have much time, and then that time, of course, patience also comes with the time.
So that was my week.
If you don't have time to be patient, then you have to use the available time. But you did also brought up something that we, of course, we at some point look at it. The issue of the dynamics now that gets underway within the global politics, especially issues of the economy. Of course, we know that the World Bank and the cousin, the IMF, have been put in place under this World Bank, and the IMF and all the rest have their founders and have their owners. And of course, at one point, we'll be talking about, especially when it comes to Uganda, where the World Bank has openly agreed that, of course, I'm told the discussion is now ongoing between the government of Uganda and the World Bank for the position they had taken on Uganda to stop the loans and any other support for the simple reason that Uganda passed a law which was against certain human rights. I don't know how big that population of human rights that Uganda has. But I was also checking that actually it is not about the human rights. Because if you are talking about human rights, there are countries in this world that have worse human rights records than Uganda. But they are also heavily being funded by the World Bank. If you are talking about issues of gay issues, whatever, LGTB, up to 10 numbers as they go, there are countries, including those from Europe, even Americas, that have worse legislation. Last time we were discussing, I said, even in America itself has about 15 states that have passed have legislated against the so-called affirmation. Is it sexual affirmation, something like that? But no one seemed to be mentioning that. Now, when it comes to Uganda, let alone now, we're not even talking about the Arab world, the UAEs and others that have death penalties, stoning and the rest, and the World Bank is still in bed with them. So I think there's something that these agencies have. I mean, Rachel, if I come to you, say I need some money to go and use back at home, then you are beginning to ask me who I slept with, or who am I going to sleep with after getting this money, or how, all these funny things. You realize it doesn't add up. But I think some of these, when you see the BRICS and other formations coming up on the global stage. I think it is, of course, it is going to be hard, not hard, it's going to take time. You remember Europe, for example, they have tried to institutionalize the euro for all the transactions, but it has taken time to make sure that it's effectively working. So I know even BRICS might take long, but that willingness that we can move together for a common purpose on this one, I think is a statement that shouldn't be underrated, like you have said, because I know it started with, it was BRIC, then finally when South Africa joins it becomes BRICS, and President Lala, I think at one point we'll have it on screen, of Brazil, has been very, very, very key on that. When he was a president, I think it's when he initiated the BRIC, and when he left, and now he's back, and now the South Africa comes in. But like she was saying, I think it is also necessary to look at more countries coming on board. The 5 members have now been admitted, including Iran and the Arabs. But Rachel was also concerned about, why is it so that only a few countries seem to be participating from the continent of Africa? Rachel, what was your concern?
I think even before I come to that particular question, you were talking about the World Bank, and you said you can't understand why there are many other organizations or many other countries which have worse relationships with this so-called, whatever they call that community.
Yeah, anyway.
And yet they have not had issues with the World Bank. My own take is that President Museveni of late has been raising the tempo when it comes to his stated and vigorous opposition to exporting raw materials. It is my belief that his stated opinion that no raw material, certainly not in large scale, will be allowed across the borders of Uganda in unprocessed form. His position is clear concerning coffee, concerning iron ore, concerning uranium, concerning oil, and a number of other things. He even is on record lately saying there was a group of Europeans who came to him talking about they wanted to exploit the uranium deposits in this country. He invited them to set up a facility to actually process this thing before it is sent wherever it is they wanted it to go. And he has not heard from them since. I am thinking that this is a way for the World Bank to make very clear that whoever has the interests of Africa at heart will not be treated lightly.
Sure.
This same World Bank, if you talk about exactly where they came from, Nduguru Garama talked about their formation back in the 40s. In my opinion, the World Bank has to be one of the most failed examples in terms of organizations. That is my personal view. These people set out initially as the International Bank of Reconstruction and Development. I am not aware of many countries that can credit their reconstruction or development to the World Bank, including Europe. When the Marshall Plan, that it was an American vehicle for reconstruction of Europe, came on form, that is in the late 40s, the World Bank promptly found another home far away from Europe because there was nothing to do there. But the records or the legacy of the World Bank does not show an organization that has been successful in executing its core mandate. So I will forgive them from now transgressing and entering areas where they cannot be any more effective. This very World Bank went on to develop tentacles, or 4 other arms, apart from the initial arm, which was the International Bank of Reconstruction and Development.
Yes.
To date, They have other arms such as the International Finance Corporation. They have the International Development Association. But those two, IB, are the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and IFC, along with IDA, have a special focus on so-called developing nations. And they have strengthened their case in as far as underwriting causes that cannot transform the African landscape. These same people, through the International Finance Corporation, have set up themselves in the private sectors of these nations, where they seek to control policy and related ways of doing business, so that we really never emerge as meaningful powers on the international scene. They have not stopped there, Ndugu Mututa. These very people have the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency or Association, something like that. And what they do is provide financing to companies in Europe or elsewhere who want to do business in these our countries.
Yeah.
We wonder why there are so many British and so many Germans and so many Chinese who have affordable capital in these countries. In other words, if the World Bank cannot deal directly with the state and tell them what to do, they will deal with your private sector. If they will not deal with your private sector, they will deal with other people that they have financed to still and come and do the same thing. But I was surprised that the same World Bank has an organization that mediates investment decisions. Can you imagine?
Sure.
In these countries. In other words, they stand there in the middle to try and see that their investors actually have a favorite climate in which to operate in these our countries.
In other words, the money finds its way back.
Any way that they can to keep you where you are is the core exertion of the World Bank. It is not reconstruction, it is not development, it is not transformation, it is to keep you where you are at any cost. No wonder they have lately found another avenue to actually do their evil works. They say human rights, but when was the last time that became the core business of a bank?
Exactly.
The reason why they're doing this, one of the things that Western nations fund very heavily is population control. They spend massive amounts of money making sure that the populations of developing nations do not continue to grow. Because for them, they're in negative population growth. I am thinking that the latest avenue of making sure our populations don't grow is to interest men in going with the men and women going with women because they cannot reproduce. Because it is not logical in any way. In fact, one of our leading opposition figures, Mr. Kyagulanyi, is amazed that every time he has presented before them, I'm not saying he's right, but every time he has said and said, in Uganda there is torture, they are not interested. In Uganda there is this, that, and that. And these really being true human rights causes, they never respond. But now that they have found people who, if encouraged, will keep Africa from exploding in population terms, they are listening. Africa is projected to have most of its population under 25 by 2050. It is the same Africa that has more resources in terms of mineral wealth than any other. Mm-hmm. Arable land, more than any other. Fresh water, more than any other. Skills development, we are upward going. They are on a war tangent to keep us from going where we need to go.
And that is my problem now. Because if you are going to look at this projected the next 20 years, a population, a community, a society that will have food and water will be able
and
to
skills.
control, yes, will control the world.
True.
And that is scaring to many of these people. And if you are talking about such a population, you are only looking at one population and one community, and that is Africa. So all efforts have been made to make sure that this does not happen. Now, when things come up like these sham things that you hear about, for me, and many Africans, I think, get concerned. Who is funding us to do that? Because if the a person who is going to push you into power is going to tell you to do many other things. But this is the problem of Africa. So what do we stand on this? Now, as we come back after this break, this is what we're going to be looking at. How does Africa stand to benefit, to be solid, to be able to succeed in the next 20 years? If we are not going to be ready today, what do we do? When we come back, please don't go away. Thank you.
Juko.
Yo.
Check the shopping, man. What's your secret?
Haven't you heard of the parish development model PDM?
Yes, I did, but I thought it was just a talk.
No, Sebatia. It is real. I and a few friends together formed a circle, accessed money from the PDM, invested in a portrait project, and now things are moving.
Juko. I thought I was one of your friends.
You are.
But you left me behind.
I didn't leave you in poverty. What you do, just visit your LC2 chairperson and your parish chief and start the process of economic transformation. Just like that. The parish development model is an initiative from the government of Uganda through the Ministry of Local Government designed to transform all lives of Ugandans for the better. PDM, my parish, my development, my life.
UBC is the national public broadcaster. We educate, inform, entertain, and inspire our audiences. You can watch us on free-to-air channel 001, DSTV channel 282, GoTV channel 371, Star Times channel 201, Zuku TV channel 20, and Azam TV channel 350. Even when your subscription expires, you can still watch UBC for free on your pay TV platforms.
Gulu City Market lies in 4 acres of land with a population of about 4,000 registered market vendors who are doing business in this facility. We really appreciate the initiative of the government to come up with this project that is benefiting not only the business community within the market, but the entire community within actually sub-region. When you look at the market previously, the market used to be not like this one. With the market vendors, they used to sell under papyrus reeds. And we used also to ferry our goods, come and sell, then you take it in the stores or elsewhere. But now, due to this infrastructural development, the vendors now, they are able now to sell, cover your goods, leave it there, and you come and get it the next day when it is safe. The safety of our goods and the convenience of doing business has improved greatly. That makes the local community very, very, very happy when they are doing business in the market now. I want to appeal to my fellow vendors and the community of the entire Chile sub-region that we need to embrace and support the government so that they continue also bringing us more development in our region.
Acholi Zono Industrial is one of the presidential initiatives which is brought here in Acholi land to skill our youth. The skilling is free of charge. What you really need, you have to be within the age of 18 to 35. They don't need any requirements apart from being willing. You have to be willing, and a youth who is willing to get the skills. The courses we have started with only 4. That is tailoring, hairdressing, carpentry, and welding. First intake, we registered 212 students. From 10 administrative units of Acholi. These students, they recruited them from different districts within the Acholi sub-region. If we continue with this cooperation, many beneficiaries will pass through us, and they will go with enough skills, unknown skills, which will change them and later bring them into an economy. We shall really fight poverty in that way.
Welcome back to this program of the Pan-African Friday, and we appreciate your time, or from wherever you are watching us on whichever medium you are following us. We have been, by the time we went off the set for the break, we were looking at what is going to happen to Africa in the next 20 years. Are we going to be able to stand to be counted, or are we still going to be followers and voters of other people's motions and positions? But I think that entirely is in the hands of the African leadership to be able to do that. We went off the screens when we were looking at what has been happening in Africa. And one of them is the BRICS, that is the meeting, the summit that is taking place in South Africa. And for Uganda, we are being represented by the Vice President who is leading the delegation to the BRICS in Johannesburg. And of course, a lot is being done, a lot is being discussed. And by the end of, apparently, there has been a number of turns and turns in that BRICS meeting. You realize that at one point, it was said that President Putin will not be coming to South Africa for the hanging arrest in case that he steps in South Africa, that South Africa has to arrest him. Apparently, former president of Sudan also went to South Africa when he also had a warrant of arrest to be arrested in South Africa. And of course, there was a drama there, but I can tell you this time it's not as dramatic as then, because I remember when he has to leave, he had to be escorted through a back door to the military base where he had to board his plane to fly back to Sudan, actually use another plane to fly back to Sudan. But I saw the arrival of President Putin in South Africa. It was elaborate. It didn't look like there were any threats on his arrest at all. And I guess even his departure, of course, a lot had been kept to the detail how, if he were to come. At one point they thought it was the foreign minister who will be in South Africa, but he did come. So, and I saw also the president of Brazil arriving. He had come actually a little earlier than expected, and the people had to run around to prepare for his arrival. Also, the Prime Minister of India is there, and the President of China, and also the other big groups. But Rachel, you are talking about African countries.
African countries, you brought up the sad development at the World Bank, where people are still firmly set in another era where they believe they must sit in the driving seat of independent nations. We pray and hope that the same ghost will not overtake China at some point, because surely within the next generation, the BRICS formation will actually be the premier vehicle of global developments.
Sure.
There's no doubt about that. Because between them, China and India have a very significant portion of the global population. And the 5 initial states account for, I believe, 25%, 40% actually, of global population. And they also say that between them, GDP and land mass is at about 25% of that of the rest of the world. So this is not a little formation. This is a very big effort with grand plans in mind.
Sure.
That aside, Mr. Mututa, even after the latest entrance, even if that will be actualized at the beginning of January, it talks to a formation that is quite ambitious, a very big push by China to take its place in global affairs. And I think it is clear that they're looking for the biggest economies per region.
Yeah, but of course, I
for
can
start.
also add information to you on that. I know that after BRICS in South Africa, we also having the G77, which is going to be in Havana. But at the same time, later on, we'll have the non-aligned movement, which is going to be in Uganda. So we're looking at these upcoming economies, but it's a statement.
Of course it is. And it's a statement that has outgrown the region where the effort began. We all know that China is at the helm as we talk because of Russia's troubles. But it is Russia that initiated this thing back in 2009. And they have been very cautious in terms of expansion, because when you think that in 15 years, they are still 5 members in about 15 years, it talks a very cautious approach. But it also talks of a very robust posture that they are taking to see that more people are taken on board in a speedier fashion.
Sure.
Because at this meeting, they've just announced that they've opened their doors to 6 new countries.
France had asked for participation, you remember?
They were not entertained. At this time, the only European country is Russia. They've taken on 2 more African nations, Ethiopia and Egypt. They've taken on another South American state, Argentina. They're taking on Saudi Arabia, Iran, and UAE. Those are the 6 people that they will be admitting at this time. But I think it talks about a very pragmatic look into economic affairs. Because when you look at about the latest Middle Eastern partners, these are people who account for a very global, a very big share of global
market,
oil
yes.
reserves. When you talk about Argentina, it's a very big South American state. So they are balancing the act between sizable populations. They're looking for nations with sizable numbers, but they're also looking for countries that have a potential to have a meaningful economic output in the days to come. But Mr. Mututa, for me, the more important consideration is that these states do not have very much in common otherwise.
Sure.
I have not seen a meaningful effort to, aside from the fact that all of them have China as a leading trading partner, nothing else, aside from the fact that they are in the global south. In other words, when you have formations like EU, formations like North African Free Trade Association, North American rather, these are states that whose agendas are very closely knit. Because when you see South Africa, we're talking about the 5 now, you talk about South Africa and you talk about Russia, India, China, and Brazil. In terms of region, they're miles apart. In terms of economic execution, they're miles apart.
Exactly.
In terms of political agreement, they're still miles apart. So I think forming cohesion across the most important parameters is their most important drawback at this time.
Exactly. Yeah, and when you even look at their current strength, they seem to waver from area to area.
And I think also, particularly India, is very important, is very focused on fence sitting.
Sure.
They are not committing themselves meaningfully, as is China, to starting to aggressively tear away from the Western model. And I think because it's such a big part of BRICS, that will moderate their aspirations in a way that will keep them from reaching where they need to go in the medium term.
Yeah,
in
but
my
also,
view.
you know, India is a country that I can tell you, like we have Kenya in Africa, in East Africa. They seem not to have a solid position on something. Well, if they see this going to benefit them, they are likely to go for that.
And that is the drawback for Nigeria also. Kenya in particular were left out despite their meaningful, because they are yet to declare their intentions most firmly concerning this new world order as China would have it.
Nduguru Garam.
Thank you so much, comrade. This is getting very serious. I even don't know where to start from. But let me commence like this. One, the history of the World Bank, if you would allow me the latitude, is such that immediately after the World War II, America emerged victorious, and it was a stronger economy.
Then.
And they came up, they mooted the idea of reconstructing the badly damaged Europe out of the World War II, and also Japan, after having thrown there the atomic bomb in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So essentially, the commencement of the World Bank was intended to reconstruct Europe and also reconstruct Japan. I want the audience to get that history, because the proper appreciation of history of something gives you a better perception of what you are into. Then the objectives of this particular World Bank, so they say, at least in the books, two. One was to, still is, to eradicate, you have to get to know the words, to eradicate poverty from developing countries. And two, to equitably distribute prosperity across the board.
Sure.
Now, the actual operations of the World Bank were from 1946. Question is, from probably you can look at when we averagely, Africa is about 60 years after regaining independence. Question is, has the objectives of the World Bank been achieved, at least from the perspective of the framers of the World Bank? The two objectives, eradicating poverty and also distributing equitably wealth or prosperity across the board. Has those objectives been achieved? Food for thought. Now, the membership of the World Bank is such that almost all the UN members are members of the World Bank. And with it, of course, goes with the International Monetary Fund, which we all group and call the Bretton Woods institutions. And for a very long time, we have been getting loans from the World Bank at between 8 and 10%. But at the same time, the countries, the European countries and some selected members from the Asia do get these loans at between 3 to 5%. Now, this is important for us to appreciate for whom is this World Bank designed to benefit. For a very long time, especially Africa, in the year around mid-1980s, Africa, generally speaking, right from Nigeria, slope down to Ghana, look at Kenya, Uganda, all these countries were export-led economies. That's what they were running. But due to the intervention of the World Bank and IMF in what we have come to call SAPs, Structure Adjustment Programs,
Yep.
we got the persuasion, sometimes forceful persuasion, if there is such a word anyway, that go to import you instead of export. So where Uganda was doing very well with native and producing for our domestic market, but at the same time exporting fine fabric outside, where Nigeria was processing, the agricultural sector was able to process some of the foods and get them exported. We abandoned all that and we fully became, as the African continent, a net import economy vis-a-vis what we were in the mid-1880s as a progressive export-led continent. Now, that was the beginning of Africa's trouble. And that is your World Bank and IMF. I started like that because I wanted our audience to get that background of what we are talking about as far as the IMF and World Bank are concerned. Now, recently, His Excellency the President wrote to the Wazukuru. And the complaint was that as far as he's concerned, the major problem with the developing economies, Africa and Uganda in particular, is that we have got a civil service which is infested with compradors who are agents of neocolonialism and who have been doing the bidding of their neo-colonial masters. And that one, because he tags it to the kind of loans that we have been getting. And he argues in that 27-page letter, including the letters which he attaches in between, that he has over a period of time been writing the relevant ministries. Please don't borrow money. He gives the example of Ministry of Agriculture, which has borrowed in a space of 10 years. It borrowed well over $800 million. And yet all that money never at any one given time even purchased a tractor, a combined harvester, or even produced fertilizers to go into agriculture and make quantitative and qualitative improvement. It was only spent on Kampala conferences, you see. So, in other words, he's making a case that even without that money, because if the money has not been put to the correct use, it has been misused in useless conferences and it has not impacted the target society, then we can do without it. That's my reading of His Excellency the President's letter. If that is so, therefore, do we need this money? The other argument is there are people who have looked at, and I think majority of them are politicians, they have looked at the projects now being funded by World Bank. They have broken them down. I have seen some arguments of these who call themselves the experts, many global economic experts and what have you. They are saying that World Bank was going to refurbish our old schools, Nabumari, St. Elios, Chegobe, all these traditional old schools, Kombon and what have you. Now, maybe, and I asked, were those schools in the first place built using World Bank money? For them to be able, that they must be run down and again get refurbished by World Bank money. Then they say, no, look, at Kampala, all these potholes, what have you. But Museveni, His Excellency the President, also in his letter underscores that even where we got this money, and somewhere the World Bank would say we are not going to be able to continue, we are not going to sponsor the construction of this so many kilometers, that Ugandan government got that money and they did a good job. In other words, I'm saying that World Bank money, and when you look at the African continent, there are some major infrastructure and other related projects, like for instance the Grand Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia. I don't know how much money of the World Bank is there, but the project is almost being completed. When the World Bank and whoever is behind it, and I must tell you also that this so-called World Bank is actually Washington Bank, because 60% of the World Bank, America has got a controlling arm. You can never be an ED of the World Bank if you are not an American. Now, how World Bank is it world? How world is the World Bank when we have got such a scenario?
At the same time, of course, you are talking about the potholes of Kampala. That's the World Bank was going to give Uganda money to be able to handle the potholes and, of course, other infrastructure. And, of course, they have done. They have given us money. Some money, like you put it, has been taken into conferences and travels, and, of course, some have done work. But can't we do, now that it is not there, can't we do it? I'm very sure that with prudent methods of running a government, because the letter, His Excellency the President letter, tells you a lot of wastage. Exactly.
That we have got wastage and we have always gotten money, probably which we would have avoided. Actually, in the same letter, there are loans which he says, when this loan came, I advise don't take it, don't take it. And they're in 200 something billion dollars.
But then when you look at where that money went, you don't see where.
It becomes a problem. So my argument is that yes, there is a lot of money that comes from Bank of Uganda, and because we are not prudent enough within our economies, we end up wasting that money. Then also, this money is borrowed, in my opinion, these are high interest rates. Because why should, for instance, the more deserving countries on the African continent borrow at 8 to 10%, when these ones which are aware of, we are told in the first world, get this money at between 3 to 5%. Why?
Same bank.
You see?
Same.
So,
that aside.
Okay. It's okay.
That aside, you are talking about the foundation on which the World Bank sits. There is this notorious system, the voting, I think they call it voting rights. And the voting rights are determined by the GDP of those nations, the ones that it originally served. But they say these voting rights go by the size of the GDP. And those countries, having been the ones that were part of this formation initially, we have America, we have Japan, we have Germany, we have France, and we have UK. And I'm thinking, UK and France are no longer top 5 in the world in terms of size of the economy. Why are they still at the top of the voting rights table? We're talking about the hypocrisy that informs these organizations. It should be India and China sitting in those slots. Yes, in 1944, China and India were nowhere in terms of global weight in GDP terms, but today they are. Today, we have about 187 members of the World Bank. And of course, we have atop these 5 in nations. But the voting rights should have changed by now to reflect these nations. Day to day, we know that in any given meeting concerning the World Bank, it is the finance or development ministers that represent their nations,
countries,
typically.
Yes.
But on a day-to-day basis, these ministers are not there. It is executive directors. To show how terrible these organizations are to the rest of the world, each of these 5 have executive directors. And those are the ones that oversee their interests. And the rest of us have 19 directors. So 187 minus 5 is what, 182? So 19 men and women represent 182 nations. Laughable. Why do 5 need 5 men? And for us, or women. And for us, we need 19 folks to oversee almost 200 nations.
Exactly.
That flaw is a fatal one. the World Bank is incapable of representing the nations of the world in this state, as is the United Nations and other such
There
organizations.
is this way, one time they, among their values, they say, there's something they said here, we ensure our words are consistent with our actions.
There is another question, even before you continue, Mr. Matuta. I have another question. If there are 19 executive directors at the World Bank representing the rest of us, aside from those 5 countries, was there a quorum that was reached to reach this laughable decision to withdraw financing from Uganda? Or was it these 5 folks who have oppressed us all these years, who sat in a corner of the World Bank and reached this untenable position? Were those other countries involved? It is this global order that the BRICS nations are determined to overturn.
And the faster the better.
There is no way, it is impossible for the World Bank to develop a formula to develop Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, India, or Indonesia, because they are self-interested in keeping where they are.
And the unfortunate part there on this is that what has happened for a very long time, America has made the dollar the reserve currency, global reserve currency.
Without your permission.
And the global trading currency. Now, that we would keep quiet about it, and like we had kept quiet about it for a very long time, including other worthy superpowers like China. But this is what they do. They have weaponized the dollar to the extent that when they want to sanction, first of all, they will confiscate your assets because they know you are going to invest, and the investments, majority of them we will be doing in the global currency. Now they will know you are trading globally in the dollar, which for them is their local currency, but they have globalized it. Now the moment you get other countries, you put fear in other countries that you are going to use your currency, which you have forced them to use for sanctions purposes, like they tried to do and they have done in Russia. Frankly speaking, other countries are going to run away from you and form themselves, like they have now done in BRICS. They have to form alternative way of developing themselves. And this is what is happening. That now, gradually, steadily, the rest of the world is organizing itself, especially the global south, is organizing themselves differently, because the BRICS is everything that the World Bank is not. Simply put, BRICS, when you look at the BRICS, the reasons for forming, the objectives of BRICS,
It is a failed organization.
is everything that
I insist.
and the arrogance.
It is a failed organization.
No, the BRICS is not failed because we have
Not
not
BRICS,
tested
I'm talking
it.
about World Bank.
World Bank. Oh yes.
It has never met its objectives when they are giving you money.
What they say is not what they do.
But not only that, when they give you money, they give you parameters. They say this money, we expect it to achieve this one, we expect it to go this way, and for this reason.
No, you are going to fail anyway.
Why have they failed to deliver for almost 80 years? That is a failed organization.
If you want the summary of the World Bank and IMF, like Sister Rachel is saying, you just have to look at what one of their very own, John Perkins, has written about them in the Confessions of the Economic Hitman. And the debate will be settled. In other words, this is an institution that was set up and has choreographed the way of undermining other economies, creating and sustaining them as producers and providers of raw materials, such that America and her cousins can keep on top. Now that the arrangement is shifting and the carpet is being pulled under their feet, that we can no longer remain as a source of raw materials. If Kufo in Ghana tells the French and the Switzerland people that no, we can no longer give you our coconuts. We are going to produce the chocolates from here. Then we sell you the chocolates since you like eating the
If you like
chocolates.
chocolates.
When the guys in Niger and Mali say, no, look, we are no longer interested in giving you our gold in its raw form.
And uranium.
We are and uranium, and we very well know that France has got Niger as its second, after Kazakhstan, as its second largest producer of uranium. France having one of the biggest enrichers, uranium enrichers, and one of the highest source of power generating, because they generate power from the uranium. Now, when you get these sources, we know where Kazakhstan now is as far as the arrangement, global arrangements are concerned. We know where Niger now is, and therefore, when you get that percentage being knocked off from supplying France, then we know where the power that France has been generating is going to be negatively affected. Now, when that is happening, we are saying that the other rest of the world is waking up to say, where does power lie?
Exactly.
We have been lied for far too long, and this time we can organize our. And even if, by the way, the argument is no. Even China is going to cheat you. Even Russia is going to cheat you. But you are going to cheat me when I have realized that the one who was cheating me 80% was a bigger thief. If you are coming to cheat me at 40%,
But even,
at least I will remain with 60%.
Even when you cheat me, you will cheat me knowing.
I'm conscious. I'm conscious that you're actually cheating me.
But you see, a case in point, President Museveni in his missive, he said, among other things, that the government of Uganda has identified at least 4 areas, key areas, in which that we can use as vehicles to actually reach this development level that we have aspired to. He talked about ICT, he talked about industry, he talked about services delivery and commercial agriculture. I am not aware of any substantive and sustained interventions to make sure, I'm talking about the World Bank again, to make sure that Uganda moves from this whole agriculture to rain-fed agriculture to the next level. I have not heard. Not so. He even mentioned and said, this is in relation to industry. After Uganda had struggled, entered some agreement with private partners, and they set up this pharmaceutical plant. He said, World Bank specified that Uganda cannot buy drugs from that factory, which sits on Ugandan soil, using World Bank money. But you must import,
Exactly.
Really?
Exactly.
These are the people we are dealing with.
No, but the contradiction, if you allow me, this is a contradiction. Actually, I wanted to get to that much earlier, but it's good. Let me just use a few minutes. I seek your indulgence. If you want to know the contradiction that the Western countries have always mingled themselves in, you just have to look at, they talk about tenets upon which proper progressive democracies prosper. They talk about democracy. They say you must be a democratic country. You must not overstay, have regular periodic elections. At least those are their benchmarks. But when you go in history, you realize that the bigger part of Africa, right from independence, regaining of independence, Patrice Lumumba, and I have already said this, but I will repeat it because people must understand it, that actually it is the hypocrisy of the highest order. When Patrice Lumumba, who was hardly 1 year in government, started questioning how the resources of DRC were being used, and he was proposing to reorganize the economy of DRC that had suffered under the shambolic leadership of Leopold II and Belgium, he was assassinated. In the very first year, he didn't even attend the Organization of African Unity Conference in 1963. When Osejefo Dr. Kwame Nkrumah said we need to organize and build Ghana into a model country on the African continent, upon which the rest of the African countries are going to copy and know that we can do it ourselves without going elsewhere. They organized a coup and he died a miserable man.
Sure.
When Olympius in Togo started running the country, including the Central African Republic, by the way, started running the country the way the white man was proposing, but under the auspices and interest of the people of Togo, Olympius was assassinated. When Abdul Gamar Nasser, the Egyptian, started running the country and saying, wow, we must not talk about independence, we must see independence in the lives of the people of Ghana. Egypt. We know what happened.
He was
to him.
assassinated.
We know what happened to Amilcar Cabral when he started organizing Guinea-Conakry the way the Europeans were saying that
And Samora Machel.
democracies should be now. From there, even recently, when we had the likes of Dr. Pombe Magufuli saying, no, our problem is that we take useless and unnecessary loans and we end up, first of all, without carrying out prudent methods of running governments, we end up taking on loans which we don't need,
like the president
like
said in
the
his-
Perkins was saying in the economic hitmans, because the purpose of the so-called World Bank representatives in the respective countries is to persuade you to a point of forcing you to take the loans they are very sure you don't need, you put them where it is not necessary, and they have calculated that we are not going to be able to pay back.
them, yes.
Now, when that happens, therefore, and you get leaders, both here on the African continent and the Latin America, who say, no, we can organize the way we organize and we shall be better. Maduro in Venezuela. When you say, I want to make sure that the oil in Venezuela is properly utilized and benefit the people of Venezuela, they are enhancing economic sanctions.
What about
When
Cuba?
Cuba comes and says, I'm going to help my sister here, my brother here in Venezuela, they enhance the economic embargo. When there is Iran saying, we are going to enhance and enrich our uranium for purposes of power generation, they say, no, that is not going to be
But even
accepted.
this man,
So-
Lala of Brazil, when he started the brick
These are the
business,
trouble.
he
So
was
the
so
trouble, therefore, that we have now with the global north is that the hypocrisy has reached crescendo levels.
Let me read you this. I was reading this. When the World Bank says we ensure our words are consistent with our actions, maybe they mean so. But in the respect to that, they say we embrace diversity and pursue inclusion of backgrounds, identities, cultures, work styles, and perspectives.
Inclusion, they mean perversion.
That's
That
what-
is a code word. There is inclusion and then there's human rights. It means perversion.
Cannot-
It means overturning the cultures of the people that they are dealing with. And in overturning the cultures, you want to impose yours fair and square on my head.
Exactly.
That's really what it is.
Yeah.
But even before you come to that, Ndugu Rugarama has gone back in time. We don't even have to go that far to demonstrate how hypocritical and untenable this so-called development partnership with these organizations is for the people of Africa and elsewhere. These very same people have preached to this day. That's why China is fed up. They preach to China, they preach to India. At every single meeting, every opportunity, every missive, every video link, they're lecturing. They came and said, look, democracy. Back to the days of Socrates and other so-called great philosophers, said democracy is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. When the people of Uganda, by full consensus, said we do not want perversion in our communities, that was not democracy. Tomorrow, if you say the Western exploitation at its fullness is democracy, they will applaud you. So much so that Just the other day, France requested permission from Algeria to overfly that country in order to bomb Niger. When Algeria declined, this very week, by the way, when Algeria declined, they went to Morocco, asking rights to overfly their territory to bomb Niger for being bent on uprooting their exploitative and criminal exploitation of that country. Now, the World Bank is the financial colonizer.
Has Morocco accepted?
No, Niger would have been bombed by now because they wanted to do it urgently because ECOWAS, they think, is asleep on the job. And definitely the people of Niger don't want any part of this colonial experience. So they wanted to intervene. And that is really what the World Bank is saying, that they stand by, what did they say? They mean what they say or something like that?
They are consistent, their words and actions.
Yes. And why are they consistent? They want to exploit Africa until no, not the skin, until they enter the bone marrow. So
Because the skin is wrong.
No, the skin is on top. Now they want to extract even the bone marrow.
But
so when they say they're consistent, they're right. Their predecessors, the colonizers of the 19th century, did exactly what the World Bank is doing today. Today they are refined, they are wearing suits, and they're wearing ties, but the same intent...
Or skirts, because...
Or skirts. Or trousers. These women also wear trousers.
Exactly.
But the intent is to make sure Africa is subservient and never rises to its potential.
But they hope, there's also a hope, because when you look at it, that, and I think this is a lesson that the African people, we should learn, that the Asian tigers, at some point, had to say, wait a moment, we shall
They paid
come
a price.
to you when we want you. And though they paid the price, but it has been worth the price. Because if Korea, for example, if actually most of the Asian tigers didn't stop at one point listening to World Bank and the IMF, they wouldn't have been where they are today. So I think it is also a high time and season overdue. They should have refused this money some time back. We could have moved on. I know it's going to be painful to go through this transition if they did refuse their money. But a question also comes. Do we need them more than they need us?
No, they actually need us more than we need them. It is all has to do, you remember, I was here and I talked about a revolution, another revolution. This time the revolution we need is not to throw away the white man from the African continent. Because, quote unquote, he went away, but he has never left. What he left behind, the institutions he left behind, and those ones which are not necessarily on the African continent, but which are still a good blueprint upon which we run our economies, are still very functional. Now, what happens therefore is that the ideological revolution we need now is to be able to think independently and work independently. I will give you just about 3 examples, and probably even alluded to them. One, when for the last 6 decades, Cuba has been under economic embargo.
Severe.
Very harsh ones.
I was there, I know.
Cuba, as I talk, has got arguably the highest rates of literacy.
Actually, we were supposed to have the ambassador today with us, but she said she has some engagement.
She will be with us down here. She's the chief guest actually at the awards. The 2, we have got Cuba as a country with the highest percentage, the most beautiful percentage or ratio between doctor to patient ratio. That the rest of the world, including the capitalistic world, is actually unable to produce for themselves the quality of the doctors they need. They have got to rely on Cuba. If you want the example, go and check what happened in Italy during COVID-19. When the plane touched base from Havana, it touched base in Italy. that is when Italy got a breathing space as far as COVID-19 is concerned.
They are sharp.
I'm going.
As I speak, they are now working on the immunizing of HIV/AIDS.
Actually, they have got the best, the antidote for COVID-19. What they had discovered there as their own medicine, which of course, because of the hegemonic imperialistic tendencies and practices of America, those drugs cannot get to the rest of the world, has got the highest efficacy of well over 95%.
Sure, yes.
You see? Now, the tiger economies you are talking about, I'm glad you brought that example. Countries like Malaysia, they had to withdraw from the grip of the World Bank.
Yes.
And they used their own organic domestic approach to development. They said, let us now go into what we call developing they developed the agriculture under the auspices of cottage industry. See where Malaysia is. It's one of the tiger economies. When you read Li Kui, the book from third world to first world, Singapore, how much of the World Bank money did he use for Singapore?
Exactly.
I may not speak for Korea, because Korea, we know, is a buffer state created by America, where America opened her market, said whatever you produce here, we shall buy. The electrical subsector in Korea is 100% consumed by America. They have that already market. And the rest, of course, as we say, is history. And we know, of course, geostrategically why the Seoul, for instance, has a place in the heart of America the way it has, because there is DPRK, which is North Korea, and also there is China, which must be checked.
Yeah, but
by all
also,
intents and purposes, the example of the tiger economies is a very good example and a lesson for us.
For Africa, yes.
Because we know that at the time, around the time when we were gaining independence, the state or the country called Uganda was far much better than the majority of the countries in Asia, and that, I think, includes Korea. But of course, there was a Marshall Plan.
Yeah.
You see, when you go to Vietnam and see now, because of what the Americans did in Vietnam, and I think that's where I agree with my senior comrade Brian Kagoro, that we need to push the issue of reparations. That there's a country called America, there is a country called Britain, there is a country called France, who benefited for hundreds and hundreds of years from our raw materials, including human beings. And they have never paid anything, and they have never even apologized. We want them to apologize, but apologize by way of paying reparations.
Exactly.
And I'm not saying that that is the most the critical aspect that is going to push the African continent to a different horizon altogether. No, it is part of what is going to help us here, at the same time organize and push our people forward.
That notwithstanding, of course, we have seen that African countries are trying to consolidate. The only unfortunate part was that with the death of President Gaddafi, who was pushing for the African, of course we have the African Development Bank, but who was pushing for the African currency that will be stronger, if of course backed by the gold reserves that we have in this continent. Some of these currencies that we are trading in are just printed papers and they're not much in value, but they are doing that. So with the death of Gaddafi, I see this dream of Africa having its own currency stagnant.
We have the African Development Bank, Comrade Mututa, but is the African Development Bank our bank? You look at the major contributors. It is Japan, it is European Union, it is America, And countries, our biggest economies like South Africa and Nigeria, just contribute something very little. And that is why when we had Comrade Abia something from Nigeria, as the chief, and he made a projection that by 2040, a continent that is going to have an edge in agriculture will be the dominant continent. And he started thinking around agriculture, where definitely Africa as a continent has got an edge, a comparative advantage, and advising that if we organized ourselves and looked at agriculture as a business, we shall be a different continent altogether by 2040. I knew he had lost his job.
And who removed him? Apparently, it says the Africans who allowed that to happen. So if we
no, like in the same manner, like Chombori lost her job as the ambassador of the diaspora under the influence
but
of France.
Like Africa, like South Africa left Gaddafi to be killed because Zuma had been promised a job.
These are the contradictions, and that's why we must.
Look, even before you conclude this thing, I personally have to submit that the premier or the most advanced weapon in the asset of the neo-colonialist is the World Bank and the IMF. The greatest danger to the aspirations of the people of the world today is not the hydrogen bomb.
Yeah.
It is not the nuclear bomb or anything else that Russia or America has in its arsenal. It is the determined convergence of the chief superintendents of this system, who are determined to make sure that we are disempowered at any cost. The worst part is that they have camouflaged it in such a way that they say these policies and these ways of doing things are good for us. But more than anything else, once the structure of IMF and World Bank continues as is, and once the execution or the operations continue as is, we cannot continue.
Thank you so much, viewer, and thank you so much, colleagues who have been on this panel for today for this discussion. And we thank the viewers who have been following us. I know time is always here, and we shall have more next week when we shall continue these discussions about the welfare of Africa, and if we need this point anyway to be giving us the handouts, or we can come up with something that will help Africa to propel and project its future without necessarily having to be looked at as people who are incapable of doing anything. UBC will be continuing with more interesting programs. Please don't go away. But for us, we say until then, Friday, when we shall have another interaction, please have a nice weekend and be blessed. We thank you.